I'm a big fan of old browser games. I used to play a lot of them when I was a kid, and while most of them were buggy or repetitive, they were still a great way to kill some time while you were at school or stuck at home. I have many fond memories of sitting at the computer with my friends, laughing and showing each other games we found on random websites. So when I heard that Java was being phased out, I got to thinking about all the old games I used to enjoy, and decided to track some of them down. I went to Reddit to see if anyone knew of any of the sites that used to host these old games, since many of them were now defunct. And a few of them suggested Newgrounds, a place I was familiar with, but a few others suggested a dozen other sites. These were smaller places which made up for their lack of showmanship with a vast selection of retro games. I'd started clicking on them, basking in the nostalgia for a while and losing myself in the simple pleasures of these simple games. I mean, I was stuck at home due to quarantine, so what else did I have to do? That's how I found I Can Scare You. I read the description and really liked what I saw. It made me wonder how I'd never found this game before. I used to love the small selection of adventure games you'd sometimes find on Java websites, little maze runners or exploration adventure games, and this one had a creepy twist that I really liked. I had expected it to be a lot of poorly animated jump scares, probably some loud screams accompanied by a picture of the girl from Poltergeist, but I figured I'd try it out anyway. What did I have to lose, right? When I loaded it up, I was greeted by something very familiar. For those unaware of the concept, screensavers were used a lot back in the day to keep your monitor from freezing in place. Windows had many iconic screensavers, but one of the most recognizable was the maze you saw sprawling out before you took on the point of view of the runner, shifting around and following a set path as you tried to find the exit. This game had dropped me into a very familiar maze, with brick walls and a sand floor, and an 8-bit soundtrack trying for creepy, but was mostly just sounding spooky. It was a little different than I remembered though. The walls were black brick, like a negative copy of the maze, and covered in a bright green moss bordering on neon. The sand was also dark, and as I moved, it made that classic game crunch that meant you were walking over dirt. I could hear something like the wind in the background, and as I moved, I could see that the normal pictures on the wall had been replaced with grainy photos of people. The images were pixelated, but clearly actual photos. The strange thing was, they weren't anything like corpses or monsters or anything. They were just ordinary people. Some of them smiling, some of them looking off blankly, but all of them looking like candid shots of people from websites or the DMV or something. As I moved through the maze, I became aware of a voice that seemed to be following me. It was just a whisper at first, but the deeper I went into the maze, the louder it became. I would turn around and find the pictures were still on the wall, but whatever was making that noise was nowhere in sight. The images seemed to repeat themselves. Same 10 or 12 photos again and again, and I figured they must be the staff that had worked on the game or something. It was a little creepy having them watch me as I went through the maze, but no creepier than anything else I'd seen in the game. The voice, however, was definitely getting a little nerve-wracking. I could hear it now, and it was saying the same thing over and over again in a vaguely feminine computer voice.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned in the game, but there was nothing behind me. The voice had sounded close, and I assumed it was the enemy of the game. It kept moving away and getting closer, always just out of sight. So I just kept moving, kept looking for an exit, kept making my way through the maze. There was always an exit in the screensaver that made the maze fall apart and made a new maze begin. When I found what I was looking for, though, it turned out to be the last thing I'd expected. I came around a corner and heard the voice getting louder again.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned left and found a dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I dashed back and took a right instead. Then I found another dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I sighed and turned around to face my fate. I guess the game was over. That's when I saw what sort of beast lurked in this maze.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
It was a grainy picture just like the others, but this one moved and was far from the bland recreation the others had been. The image's eyes appeared to be leaking blood, the mouth crunching as it blared its ceaseless words. It barreled toward me lamely, filling the whole hallway, its face twisted in pixelated agony as it crashed closer and closer.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
Despite its alarming form, it was clearly a picture of my dad's face. I backpedaled in fear, running and taking turns at random until I finally came to the dead end that I'd been looking for. It contained a single floating picture. And if this was the exit grid, I didn't know if I wanted to see what sort of maze it would generate next. The image was a crumpled body, a car accident or a hit and run, lying in the street in a squishy mass of broken flesh. It was grainy and pixelated like the others, but this one made me stop and gasp a little as I tried to make sense of it. The body's face was pointed to the sky, its mouth open and its eyes staring. As I looked at it, the blood seemed to pool around it, glistening wetly despite having no origin.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I jumped as I heard the phrase uttered right behind me, loud enough to make my speakers crackle. Suddenly my character fell over and my screen was covered in red as the screaming monster with my father's face crunched its jaws over me. I turned the screen off and pushed away from my computer, suddenly not wanting to see anymore. The last image had been the most familiar of all. It wasn't every day you got to look at your own face as you lay dying. The other pictures had been strangers, weird stock images, but the image of my father and I had been unique, and they were very jarring. The face of my father had been twisted in agony, and the eyes had been turned up in anger as the neon red blood oozed from them. My own face and body had been confused, devoid of hope, as I lay bleeding to death in a pool of my own blood. Even if the game had somehow pulled pictures from my computer, it couldn't have gotten either of those from me. No picture of my father existed that looked like that, and certainly no picture of me that looked like that existed. I closed the game and realized that at some point it had gotten dark. Looking at my watch, I realized I'd been playing the game for 3 hours. It was pushing midnight, and I shut my computer down and climbed in bed. I tossed and turned as I tried to push the image of that final horror out of my mind. As grainy and unreal as it had been, it was still a picture of me, and I was clearly dying. How did they have it? Where had they come from? Those images followed me into sleep, and they haunted my dreams all night. I found that I was running from that hellish thing in my nightmares, and it stretched and chomped right behind me. It didn't beat around the bush this time, and it dogged my heels for hours as I ran through that 8-bit hell. Right at the end, I came to a dead end and saw my own body lying on the floor, surrounded by blood. I rolled my head lamely to look at myself, moaning at a mouthful of blood as the huge dad head fell on me and turned my world red. When my cell phone woke me up at 7:15, it was almost a blessing. I reached for it groggily, seeing my mom's number and answering it shakingly. Hello? Honey? Baby, I need you to listen to me for a minute. There's been an accident. Your dad's dead, sweetheart. She sobbed a little before continuing. I sat up quickly, still thinking I was dreaming. What? Turn on the news, honey. It's been all over the news since it happened. I need you to come home right away. I need someone here with me. I told her I would, and she hung up, and as I walked into the living room, switched on the TV, wondering what I would find on the screen. It had been a bus accident that had happened about an hour and a half ago. Dad, the other passengers, and the driver had been killed when another bus had T-boned them at an intersection. The bus Dad had been on had been crushed against the storefront, and the engine had ignited. The ensuing fire had made rescue very difficult. After extinguishing it, emergency services had really only been rescuing bodies. Then they started flashing the pictures of the deceased across the screen, and I felt the remote slip from my hands and clatter on the hardwood. I recognized all of them. They were the faces in the maze. I flopped bonelessly onto the couch, my legs refusing to hold me. I'm curled on the couch now, filled with a deep sense of dread over the knowledge I seemed to possess. Everyone I'd seen in that maze last night was dead now. Everyone except me. I had seen my own contorted face as I lay broken on the floor of that 8-bit maze. If everyone I had seen in there was supposed to die today, why had I seen my picture? I hadn't died. I was still clearly alive. For now. People keep calling me, but all I can do is hunker on the couch and wait. Waiting for my own fate to come and sweep me off the board as well. So if you stumble across this game in your internet travels, do yourself a favor and don't play it. I wish to God I never had. Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's story. If you'd like to support us, I've got a Patreon that I'll link below, or you could buy one of my books on Amazon. I'll put up a link to Stradview Stories, which is my latest book. If you like what you heard, join us every Wednesday for a throwback story, and every Sunday for a brand new story. I hope to see you next week. Dr. Plague, signing off.